and market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, European stocks and U.S. futures are up as traders look ahead to a busy week for economic data for clues on the state of the U.S. economy. Now, Althea Spinozzi, head of fixed income strategy at Saxo Bank, joins us also here as Bloomberg's Justina Lee. So thank you both for joining us. Althea, let's start with you. Last week was actually quite crazy. Now we're seeing a lot more of calmness on the markets. But actually, I guess a good thing about last week is that fixed income behaved in a way that's more traditional, that was meant to do.
Well, Francine, I think that the volatility that we have seen last week was surrounding the unwinding of the Japanese carry trade. And also, we cannot forget that we are in the middle of summer, so there is very little volatility, very little liquidity in markets currently. So we started the week with recession fears. We ended the week with the market being a little bit more objective and understanding that maybe we are not that close to a recession. And actually, the big problem ahead are the U.S. elections and a possible reacceleration of the economy. You see, Francine, I believe that it's true that there is a slowdown of the U.S. economy, but weakness is focused on very particular sectors in consumer staples, apparel, and restaurants. But the rest of the economy is going fairly well. We can see that also from the earnings reports. If we exclude from the Standard & Poor, the Magnificent Seven, the rest of the companies are set to grow 7% compared to last year's after quarters of declines. So we have to couple this with the fact that inflation remains at 3%, the economy is growing beyond trend, and the Federal Reserve might be starting to cut rates. That points to a reacceleration of the economy, which is bearish for bonds.
Yeah. Althea, let me also bring in Justina here. Justina, I mean, the last week, again, was pretty incredible to watch. And Althea's right. Part of it was the unwinding of the carry trade. Part of it was, I think, just panic on the Magnificent Seven and actually concerns about the U.S. economy. Are we going to see wobbles ahead or after that CPI print on Wednesday?
Yeah, that really is going to be crucial there. And right now, economists are expecting a slight acceleration, but nothing to really alarm traders. And I think the key here is not really whether we're going to get a rate cut in September. I think it will need to be a huge upside surprise to change that. But I think the key here is, are we going to get that 50 basis point cut? What does this mean for the trajectory? Because right now, money markets are pricing in 100 basis points of cuts by the end of this year. And so kind of depending on where the CPI number lands relative to expectations, I think that's what markets will be looking for.
Althea, am I right in thinking that you think the markets are ahead of themselves? I mean, you anticipate a 25 basis point rate cut in September by the Fed and then possibly just one more until the end of the year.
Absolutely. I think that at this point, bond futures are indicating the possibility of a 50 basis points rate cut by September. And I believe that it's more probable to have no rate cut rather than a 50 basis points rate cut. So eventually, Francine, markets will need to push back on what is priced in terms of interest rate expectations, and that's bearish for U.S. Treasuries. I really believe that the fair value of 10-year U.S. Treasuries is between 4.5% and 5%, and the reason being is that the term premium remain negative. And we need that to rise in order to better compensate investors for the risk of inflation to remain sticky and elevated.
And Justina, Althea also points to the fact that actually there's been localized weakness, that there's weakness that's pretty sector specific. Do you think, Justina, that the recession fears have been overblown?
I think so. I think by the end of last week, people have woken up to the fact that it's not that a recession is imminent, but I think people are kind of looking at the weaknesses in manufacturing, for instance, and of course, the uptick in the unemployment rate. But even there, everyone was talking about the Somme rule last week, but even there, even the Claudia Somme herself has said that it might not be as indicative this time. Is the unemployment rate kind of ticking up about, the weakening demand? Or is it just about a surge in supply from, immigration, for instance? And so I think people are kind of parsing these different strands here. But what seems clear is we don't have to worry about a severe slowdown just yet.
So, Althea, how do you play treasuries right now? What part of the market or what part of the yield curve do you buy into?
I remain very cautious, Francine. I really like the front part of the yield curve up to 5 years. And you see, with 2-year U.S. Treasuries, it's almost impossible to lose money. You need yields to rise beyond 8% in order to get them in the red within a year of holding period. But because the term premium remains negative, it's very hard to get too far the duration curve. I really like also selective corporate bonds, especially in the high yield corporate space. And the reason is that we have seen spreads widening last week, and there are some junk bonds that are now paying an interesting yield and have been able to refinance their debt beyond 2026. These are the kind of instruments that I believe are interesting because are providing a buffer against inflation. So in short, Francine, what we are seeing today is a replication of the theme that we have seen throughout 2022 and 2023. Its yield is important. We need to create a buffer against the risk of sticky inflation and central banks not to deliver on interest rate cuts.
Justina, when does the focus move to China more?
I think it is this week. We've got kind of a spate of data coming out of China, and it's kind of coming at an interesting point because we've got news recently that the Chinese authorities have been kind of giving guidance to the brokerages, telling them to halt the bond rally. They think it's gone too far. But the problem is, people are buying bonds because they're worried about the economy. And kind of in that lens, we're going to get, the money supply data, industrial production, retail sales. And I think it's going to tell you whether the momentum really is turning here, because obviously we've been worried about Chinese consumer demand. But at the same time, if the U.S. economy is slowing, that's going to hurt the export engine as well. And so you kind of have a bit of a double whammy there if they're unable to kind of turn consumer spending around.
And Althea, when's the right time to start thinking also about, the U.S. election, what that means in terms of fiscal deficit, what that means to the yield curve, also because of the tension between U.S. and China?
I believe that it's important to think about it right now. We have two candidates, and both of them look like they are not scaling back on fiscal spending. In the case of Trump victory, we are going to have a higher geopolitical risk, and he's going to implement steeper tariffs against China that will put upward pressure on inflation. So when I look at the U.S. election, really, Francine, I really look at the risk of inflation to be to remain, and really for the yield curve to remain inverted for longer, because the Federal Reserve will not be able to begin a sustainable interest rate cutting cycle.
Althea, thank you so much. Althea Spinozzi, head of fixed income strategy at Saxo Bank, and Bloomberg's Justina Lee. With all this volatility, I keep on losing my voice. Now, coming up, a rush for the exit. Foreign investors pulled $15 billion from China in the second quarter as concerns remain about the health of Asia's biggest economy. We'll discuss that next, and this is Bloomberg. The conversations that matter, the insights you need. This is The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now to China, where foreign investors pulled out a record amount of money, $15 billion last quarter. Now, if the decline were to continue for the rest of the year, it would be China's first annual net outflow since 1990. Now, foreign investment into China has slumped in recent years after hitting a record in 2021, when James Mager, a senior reporter on the Chinese economy and government, now joins us. So, James, great to have you with us today. So what does the data actually show us, and what's driving the drop in foreign investment into China?
I think what you're seeing is in a continuation of last year's really weak numbers. We saw a record, there was a record low, it was like about a 30-year low last year in companies putting money into China. And this year you're seeing a continuation of that. Basically, yields are obviously much higher in the US and other developed economies than they are in China. The Chinese central bank is cutting rates now. And so if you're a foreign company, you're looking at a weak Chinese economy, you're looking at growth, is not even going to be 5% this year, it's only about 5%. And then you look across the Pacific to the US, where you can get 5% just by having your money in treasuries, you see a better investment environment. So companies are taking their profits and they're moving them offshore. And then you're also seeing a lot of foreign companies, especially in the car space, are pulling out of China or cutting back their investments in China because they're just not able to compete in the Chinese market against companies like BYD anymore. So you see Mitsubishi pull out, where you saw Honda was cutting back, Nissan is cutting back, Hyundai is cutting back. A lot of the foreign brands, which were doing really, really well in China till just a few years ago, are now really pulling back on their investments there, and that's also driving, driving these numbers and this, this drop we saw in the second quarter.
James, Chinese firms are also investing overseas at a record pace. So what's driving that?
I think it's the opposite of that. It's these very, very strong Chinese car companies and battery companies which are really driving this record $71 billion in outbound investment we saw in the second quarter. BYD has opened factories in Thailand, Brazil. It's opening factories in Turkey. It's talking about opening a factory in Hungary. It's opened a factory in Kazakhstan. You've got battery factories that are being opened around the world to supply not only Chinese EVs, but for other companies' EVs as well. You've got Chinese companies building chemical plants in Saudi Arabia and other places. So Chinese companies are going out now in ways they haven't gone out for probably the last 10 years to really try and take advantage of, one, the demand for their goods. Chinese EVs are some of the best in the world. The battery technology is the best in the world. They lead on solar panels. But then also because they're having to build overseas because of higher tariffs. You can't, a lot of the things like EVs, for example, you can't ship from China to the US. The EU has obviously put in tariffs as well. So there's a lot of pressure on Chinese companies to build their factories in Europe or in South America or in America so they can get their goods to customers in those markets.
James, thank you so much. James Mager, there, a Bloomberg senior reporter on the Chinese economy and government, joining us this morning. Now, coming up, Disney looks to ramp up its expansion plans by betting big on the bad guys. We'll tell you more after the break. This is Bloomberg. U.S. inflation expected to have picked up last month, but not enough to derail the Fed from a widely anticipated interest rate cut in September. Now, for more on all of this, let's bring in Ven Ram from Bloomberg MLIV. So, Ven, first of all, good morning. What's the bias for Treasuries heading into this week's CPI?
Morning, Francine. I think that the path of least resistance for Treasuries, at least the front end, is to be headed higher because, the markets are thinking that, the expectation, as you mentioned, on the CPI is for a reading of 3%. So the markets are kind of used to this idea that core CPC is going to be around 2.7%, headline inflation and core inflation are going to be around 3%. So if you juxtapose the Fed's policy rate of 5.375 against that, it's clear that it's abundantly clear that the Fed's real policy rate is restrictive at this point, and the Fed is kind of minded about its dual mandate, i.e., it's concerned about the labor market more than it has ever been in the cycle. That means that, a rate cut is to be expected soon. But considering how much the markets rallied last week, I think some correction is due. And that is what we are seeing, which means that the 2-year Treasury yield should head towards 4.20 in the coming days.
Then bonds are back as a hedge after failing investors for years. How excited are you about the week that's been?
Well, I think that the 10-year Treasury yield is still south of 4%, and I think that demeanor of the markets is likely to continue because there's going to be this chase for duration. There is increasingly, as we mentioned, the Fed is going to be cutting rates, and these yields are going to looking a lot richer than they've been in this cycle, given how compliant inflation has been, or rather disinflation has been. So I think that the chase here is going to be continued duration in the months ahead.
So, Ven, the BOE's Catherine Mann has also this morning warned against complacency about inflation, but she's the ultra hawk. I mean, we get CPI reading out of the UK this week. Does it complicate things for the Bank of England, or do we just need to remember she's the ultra hawk?
Well, I think that, the BOE kind of crossed the Rubicon, as it were, on earlier this month when they cut rates. Now, typically, central banks are most reluctant at the inflection point of the cycle, i.e. when they are about to raise rates or when they are about to cut rates for the first time in the cycle. That has already happened earlier in August. So I think that the bar for further rate cuts is much lower than it was previously. And therefore, I think that even with a mild uptick in inflation in the coming months, I think that the BOE has shown to us that they're very keen to lower the policy rate to take it to less restrictive levels, and which is why I think that the bias is for gilt yields to rally from here.
Ven, as always, thank you so much. Ven Ram there with some great insight from our Bloomberg MLIV, where he's a strategist. Now, on to corporate news, and Walt Disney has unveiled a number of new theme park attractions as it looks to expand its resorts business. Now, these will include an area devoted to movie villains and a doubling of its Avengers campus in California. Now, last September, Disney announced long-term plans for its parks and resorts that included investment of around $60 billion over the next 10 years. Well, Charlie Wells from Bloomberg News joins us. Charlie, this is exciting for us Disney lovers, but when you look at the villains, can they actually align this to make sure that investors are happy with returns?
Yeah, well, the villains may come to actually save the day for Disney in this case. They're just a little bit misunderstood. And basically, Wall Street has been looking for some specifics on this plan for a long time. Yeah. So actually, when the company announced that $60 billion plan of investment last year, Disney's share price actually fell because investors wanted to know exactly how they were going to spend that money. So this is what we're finally getting here. We're getting, the largest expansion at the Magic Kingdom in its history, a lot in Shanghai and Hong Kong, and even in Paris down the road, a Lion King themed ride, which should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun. So what are the risks of park expansion at a time where consumers are kind of feeling the pinch and ticket prices can't go up too much?
Yeah, so this is sort of an inopportune time for this announcement to come, actually, because Disney's earnings report recently showed some softness. So consumers on that lower end in the U.S. kind of pushing back on the ticket pricing, and then consumers on the higher end traveling abroad. And so they find themselves in a difficult point right now. But of course, these are long-term capital investments, which should pay dividends for them over time.
So when do we know if the strategy is working?
I mean, look, it could take a while, but I think for Disney, this is really crucial. And experiences, in 2023, they formed 70% of operating income, so a big part of the business. And at a time when other media companies are really struggling with that terrestrial lag and sort of their cable properties, it's really important for Disney to have this diversification.
So what can you tell us? I mean, when you look at their strategy, resorts has been doing quite well, especially if you're expecting a lot of investments. But actually subscriptions and I guess streaming has been dodgier?
Oh, it has. And I think actually, it's all about content for this company. And in their earnings report, for the first time, their streaming platform was actually profitable. But that took a long, long time. And really, it ties into content and bringing it back to diversification.
Thank you so much, Charlie Wells, there with the very latest on Disney. You see dodgier, that's like CFA level 6. Welcome to August, everyone. This is a picture for U.S. futures across the board. We've had a very difficult week last week because of all the volatility, mainly because of the unwinding of the carry trade, but frankly also concerns about what the Fed does next. Now, global stocks at the moment seeing modest gains. Traders preparing for a week packed with U.S. data that should shed some lights on the health of the world's largest economy, but also the outlook for Fed interest rates. Coming up, Vice President Kamala Harris has energized the Democratic ticket and swing state voters. That's according to a new poll. We get the latest on the race for the White House next. This is Bloomberg. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. These are your top stories. European stocks rising after last week's volatility as traders wait for a host of economic data over the coming days, including U.S. consumer inflation. Foreign investors pull a record amount of money from China last quarter, another warning sign for the world's second largest economy. Plus, a new poll shows that Kamala Harris, leading Donald Trump in 3 key swing states, will bring you the latest on the race for the White House. Let's get straight into U.S. politics, and that's after the New York Times Siena poll. Now, for more, let's bring in Tina Fordham from Fordham Global Foresight. Tina, thank you for joining us. Look, it's quite an incredible, energized, 10 days since Kamala Harris appointed her VP candidate. I don't know what you've learned and how surprised you are by the polls right now.
It's a remarkable turnaround. It's a reminder that using polling data to extrapolate the future wouldn't have brought you this kind of insight. I've been saying all year this is an extraordinary race with so many wild cards and so many unusual variables. It wouldn't follow the playbook. But even so, no one expected, I think, to see the energy that the Harris-Walz ticket has brought to bear.
How do you explain this energy? So is it a flawed vice presidential candidate on the Trump side? Or is it really, I guess the big question is, can Tim Walz actually gain a lot of the swing states?
So what they brought to the ticket, I think, is an opportunity for people to abandon their previous positions. It seems to me, we have the same U.S. economy now that we did 3 weeks ago. No. So the U.S. economy hasn't changed much, and that's a reminder to market participants who really tend to be quite economically deterministic in their views. Suddenly all of those, talk about inflation and other things have fallen away, and it's not just because of the expected Fed rate cut. I think that people see an opportunity to be part of something. People are talking about how this is like Obama. I think it actually reminds me of the first Clinton campaign with the energy. And it's not focus group. This messaging isn't feeling canned.
So let's also bring in Ross Matheson, Bloomberg's EMEA news director. Ross, I guess the question is, the 5th of November is still a long time away. So can the Democrats continue with this energy, and can they continue doing quite well in the polls?
What's interesting, as Tina was saying, she has momentum and she's raising money. She's out campaigning aggressively, and she seems to be resonating along with her running mate. And that's got the Trump camp, quite scared, it seemed, at this point. They're trying to regroup their campaign, and we'll see that later today, obviously, when Donald Trump sits down on Twitter with Elon Musk and has his unfettered interview. But the question, as you say, is continuing to have that momentum, because we will get data points. We got CPI coming in the US this week. And in the end, when voters do go to vote, one thing they tend to vote for is those bread and butter issues of the economy. And they'll want to know from her what are her policies on the economy. We can see she's starting to unroll some of those now. But that's where in the polls, Donald Trump is still polling a little bit ahead, is that he's seen as a better steward of the economy and better placed to deal with immigration issues. She's seen as better placed to deal with other issues that voters care about. But those are two where he is still a little bit in front in the polls, and so she really needs to put some specifics out on what her economic policies will be, because that's something before, as vice president and a politician for many years, she's not had to present that much on. And so that's one area where she's a little bit untested. And so that's something where, alongside that momentum, and it seems to be quite natural as well, as Tina was saying, she does have to come out with some proper policies.
But, so, Ross, how much of this election is actually being fought on the internet or on social media, and how much of it is actually in-person rallies? And it feels at times that it's much more about culture wars than it is about the economy that people will vote on.
And it is, and obviously it's interesting to see the campaigning that's happening in these swing states, because it does feel like it's gone back to kind of face-to-face, bit grassroots and quite personal. So you're personalising your message wherever you're going. And so you're talking, to these large crowds, but you're also talking to smaller groups in these places. And obviously the internet plays an important part in that, how much you're using in your social media campaigning. That's where I guess you can get traction on things like disinformation that might be getting propagated, or claims that you're making. They're all making up new nicknames for each other to call each other, and that's where that kind of gets disseminated. But in terms of talking to people directly, that does seem to be something that they've seized on, the Harris-Walz camp as doing, because people want to hear from politicians directly.
How do you see this campaign kind of, changing so we are expecting Elon Musk to interview Donald Trump a little bit later on X, but does, the Trump camp have to regroup and rethink their strategy now that they have a new ticket on the other side?
Absolutely, and they're not prepared. They were caught completely flat-footed by Biden's departure, and Harris is taking on the nomination. You can see that Trump is quite bitter about having to come up with a new strategy, and they haven't really come up with one. They've been trading insults, but I disagree with Roz a little bit about the need to come up with policy positions. Yes, eventually, but for now, this strategy is working really well for Harris and Walz, and they're not only, they're breaking records in raising money, and mainly with small dollar donors. It's not huge corporate donations. And you can see that grassroots, a lot of talk about a vibe. In terms of momentum, we've got some key dates coming up, right? So the Democratic National Convention starts this week. Interviews are now scheduled or about to be scheduled for the end of August. And we're either going to have one or two or maybe three debates, September 10th being the first one. And don't forget that early voting starts in America much sooner than people realize. We're not just waiting for November 5th. In some states, they can start in October.
I mean, there's a great piece actually on Bloomberg Opinion, which I really enjoyed reading, by Francis Wilkinson, talking about Kamala Harris's running mate and his traditional manly traits, and the fact that actually that probably scares Republicans, and that means that they need to change tack. At the end of the day, Roz, it's 200, 300,000 voters that they need to focus on swing states. What polls, how does their strategy kind of zone in on that?
Well, that's right. So it's picking, it is always a mathematical calculation, and that's what also went into Harris's selection of her running mate. You look at what states you need to win, where are the voters in those states that you need to win, and how do you get the mix of people to ensure that maths kind of plays out. So it was very much a calculated move by Harris to pick Tim Walz. She had a selection, obviously, of candidates who could have also helped with those key states, but she zoned in on someone specifically because of that, and as a good pair for her. So it was a really tactical move to have done that. So now they need to go out again to those specific voters, and that's why this effort to go and talk directly to them, face to face, and to say, I'm listening to your concerns, I'm hearing them, and this is what I'm doing about them, versus shouting at you on social media, could be a really good tactic for her, because it will come down to a specific number of voters in a specific number of states.
Tina, there are rumors that, of course, Donald Trump regrets picking his vice president, he didn't know at the time that it'd be Kamala Harris, that actually there's just flawed in that candidate. Can he replace him, or is that it?
So procedurally, he can't exactly replace, but, he could force Vance out. In politics, it's the art of the possible, as we always say. Vance has been left holding the bag while Trump retreats to Mar-a-Lago and tweets and holds press conferences from there. Trump isn't on the campaign trail right now. Vance was on all the U.S. Sunday morning talk shows yesterday, and somebody said that he sounds like a blogger. And I think that that's quite a useful way of thinking about this.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, the cat lady remarks and this sort of thing, this is landing punches. In terms of what Harris and Walz are doing, as an American, let me add a little bit of color to this. They've put out, for example, some, branded products. Trump has his metallic trainers. They've got some camo-themed beer holders or drink holders and baseball hats. Now, what is that saying? That's appealing to Walz, who is a hunter, a former artilleryman and the Army, but rebranding those kind of American patriotic values for Democrats. Republicans have long held the ground on freedom, on the Second Amendment, gun rights, and these sorts of things. So what's happening with Harris and Walz is really interesting from my perspective.
Because they're trying to go broader, basically, Roz, and I guess regaining some of that, masculinity that maybe the Republicans tried to own for a very long time.
Yeah.
Well, very much so. They're trying to say that you can vote for us and we represent these views and we represent you as an American, and this is not just Republican territory. As Tina was saying, they've been careful on gun rights and so on. And one area that she's been very strong on, though, and this appeals to women as a whole generally, is abortion. And that's where Trump obviously polls very badly. And she's got a very strong position on that. So she's not afraid to take strong positions when she needs to. And that's something that she has done, repeatedly when it comes to abortion. And so that will target, women voters in particular across the spectrum as well. And so that's a very tactical move on her part. So she is trying to broadly appeal. She's trying to say, as Tina was saying, we can represent you as well as Democrats. But also these are things that we particularly believe in and think are important. And that's where abortion for her could be a good vote winner.
Roz and Tina, thank you so much. Tina Fordham and Roz Matheson both stay with us. Now, coming up, Hamas responds to calls for a new round of ceasefire talks with Israel due to begin this week. We'll have the details next. And this is Bloomberg. The conversations that matter, the insights you need. This is The Pulse and Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, Hamas is calling for a plan to implement a ceasefire with Israel instead of a new round of talks. Meanwhile, Israel says an airstrike that killed about 100 people at a school in Gaza targeted a Hamas command center. Well, Stuart Livingston-Wallace, Bloomberg's head of Middle East and North Africa, joins us now from Dubai. Stuart, thank you for joining us. So a new round of ceasefire talks due to take place on Thursday. What exactly are the chances of success?
I think much the same as previously, in the sense that we've had positive rhetoric, particularly from the US administration over the last several months, and of course nothing has materialized. However, we are getting to the stage now where the hostilities in Gaza, yes, they're ongoing, and yes, there continue to be very significant incidents like we saw over the weekend, but in terms of the scale of the assault, that has definitely died down, and you're seeing to some extent a redeployment back within Israel. So from Israel's perspective, they do appear to be making a lot of gains in terms of their objectives, that is with destroying the Hamas leadership. However, it is very much not mission accomplished. On the other hand, you're now getting this intense pressure, intense diplomatic effort, and the threat of Iran being drawn directly into the conflict. Under that scenario, it may make sense at this stage for Israel to agree to some sort of ceasefire deal. Now, whether that will hold, as we saw several months ago, where it kind of fell apart after a few days, remains to be seen. But I think there is a certain amount of appetite there.
What's the international community, Stuart, saying after more and more civilians are getting killed in Gaza?
I think the focus, again, is on de-escalation. So I sort of point everyone to what's been happening in the aftermath of the assassination that we saw in South Beirut and the one we saw in Tehran. Now, particularly the one in Tehran, because it was so deeply embarrassing to the Iranian regime. And previously, with the exception of that one incident in April where Iran sent rockets and drones directly at Israel, by and large it's operated through its proxies, which are more or less surrounding Israel. So in Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and of course in Gaza itself. What that assassination did was effectively provoke Iran into needing to retaliate of some sort, and that in turn started this cascade of diplomatic efforts that you saw from world leaders to try and simmer things down. And all of that is pointing to potentially something at the ceasefire talks that we're expecting on Thursday. Now, quite where they're going to take place, we don't know. Probably Doha, could be Cairo, but again, we've got a couple of days to see where they can actually meet up and see if they can make any headway this time.
Stuart, thank you so much. Stuart Livingston-Wallace there, Bloomberg's head of Middle East and North Africa. Now let's bring back Tina Fordham, founder and geopolitical strategist at Fordham Global Foresight, and Rosalind Matheson, Bloomberg's EMEA news director. So when you look at the U.S. race, actually, for the elections, Ros, does foreign policy come into their thinking? I know Kamala Harris has been doorstepped many times, especially as we have more civilian deaths, but just trying to figure out what, if she were in charge, what the Middle East policy would be.
Well, it does matter a bit for the US election because it matters to some of the voting bases in the US. People have strong views. Either they support Israel quite strongly in this or they might be very pro-Palestine. And so in some key states, there are strong bases of voters that she needs to tread carefully with. I mean, we saw that in some of the calculations again about her vice presidential pick. And meanwhile, separately, you do have, Tim Walz and questions about his views on China. So you can see how this does come in to the conversation, be it China or the Middle East. And so she has to be careful about that. But she's been very strong so far on Israel. She said, I wouldn't stop shipments of weapons to Israel either. She, defending, Israel's right to defend itself while expressing concern, like Joe Biden, about the humanitarian situation inside Gaza. So she's kind of hewed to the established policy of the Democratic Party so far when it comes to that. So for the election, it may matter a bit, but then the question is if she's president come next year and this war is still going and the conflict in Ukraine is still going, we've got tensions with China, over Taiwan, but China itself, she'll have a lot on her plate when it comes to foreign policy, and she is a bit untested on that front.
How do you see the Middle East resolving itself? It feels like there was escalation, but now we're waiting. So it's unclear where this goes, and we're seeing more civilian casualties.
Well, that's right. And that last chance saloon peace conference this week that includes Qatar and Egypt and the United States is going to be very closely watched. Now, the question in my mind is how serious Hamas and Israel are taking this conference, because wars end when one side surrenders, and neither side seems even close, in my view, to surrendering, right? And they're not closer to winning. The Iran retaliation for the Israeli assassinations, the presumed Israeli assassinations, could come as early as today. It's likely to be, I think, strategic. So it might be in a population center, like even Tel Aviv, but against a military target. If there's a mistake or a miscalculation and there are civilian casualties, this kind of escalatory cycle could continue. But there's one key variable, if you let me just say one final thing that I'm watching. And remember that Joe Biden, now that he's unencumbered by seeking re-election, could change his position, could either offer concessions or incentives, whatever it might be, because he's concerned now about his legacy.
But anything he does, would that not actually almost transfer to Kamala Harris in terms of policy? And you don't seem very optimistic about any kind of way forward this week or in the next couple of weeks.
Neither side feels enough pressure, but that's what I'm saying. Biden could turn up the pressure. Harris has to be careful. The one area, though, where she has put a bit of daylight between herself and Biden is on Israel. She doesn't want a DNC with a lot of protesters. And another point, don't forget, the campus protests that were so messy and complicated will probably start up again once school returns in September.
Rose, how do you see the way forward?
Well, as Tina's saying, it's very, very complicated because we have Hamas and Israel saying, yes, we're both interested in a truce, but there's still some way apart. I mean, Hamas says that the starting point for a truce has to be a pathway to a permanent end to the conflict. Israel says, no, any truce has to be temporary and allow us, if need be, as and when we want to resume fighting. That's a fundamental difference. And so there has to be an incentive on both sides, as Tina was saying, to really get towards a ceasefire where either, both sides feel they get something that they wanted and they're not giving too much away in the process, and they don't seem to be there. I mean, we've had so many rounds of talks that have been unsuccessful and not led anywhere. So the question is, where is the momentum coming this week for that to happen? Is it because they truly believe it will ward off retaliation from Iran as a result?
Many questions which we need answers for. Thank you both for joining us. Tina Fordham, a geopolitical strategist at Fordham Global Foresight, and Bloomberg's Rosalind Matheson. Coming up, Ukraine says the Russian army has started a fire at an occupied nuclear plant, while Russia blames a Ukrainian drone for the explosion. We have the details next, and this is Bloomberg. The International Atomic Energy Agency has demanded immediate access to a nuclear power plant in southern Ukraine in order to assess damage from fire, which Kyiv has blamed on Russia. Now let's get more on the story with Bloomberg's team leader on Russia, economy and government, Anthony Halpin, in Dubai. Tony, thank you for joining us. So what's the latest on the nuclear plant?
Well, Russian media is citing Russian sources now saying that this fire is out. Russia blamed a Ukrainian drone for the blaze. Ukraine has blamed Russia. The International Atomic Energy Agency, as you say, is seeking access to the plant. They want to assess damage. And the director of the agency, Rafael Grossi, is calling on both sides to cease what he calls reckless attacks on the plant because of the risk of a nuclear accident. This is Europe's largest nuclear plant. It's been under Russian occupation since very early in the war, and it's close to frontline conflict between the two sides. So it's a vulnerable site, and as you see, there's the potential always for some sort of accident there.
So what's happening with the Ukrainian incursion into Russia, and how is Russia responding to that, Tony?
Yeah, Russia is still struggling to regain control of its border. It hasn't managed to expel Ukrainian forces. There's some evidence that it's spreading into a neighboring region called Belgorod. The local officials there started ordering people to leave border regions this morning. And Russia is rushing reinforcements, tanks, men, artillery to try and halt this invasion. It's very embarrassing for the Kremlin that Ukraine has managed to enter its territory. It somewhat breaks Vladimir Putin's image as a leader able to protect Russians, because there are tens of thousands of Russians now fleeing their homes in that region, and Russia is still struggling to regain control.
Tony, thank you so much. Tony Halpin there, Bloomberg's team leader on Russia, economy and government. Now, quickly, let's just look at the markets, because global stocks have been posting some pretty modest gains. Traders preparing for a week packed with U.S. data that will shed light on the health of the world's largest economy, but also on the outlook, we hope, for Federal Reserve interest rates. There's been some relief, certainly, from the volatility that we saw last week that ripped through markets on Monday and Tuesday. Up next, Bloomberg Brief, and this is Bloomberg.